So I'd like to welcome everyone to our talk today, the Color Research Society of Canada. We are celebrating our 10th anniversary year this year, and we're very happy to have Robert Hirschler to speak to us today. We are using the wonders of the internet to bring him from Hungary, and that's one of the good things that has come about with our lecture series. We've been able to expand access to people all over, which is terrific. So I'm very happy to introduce to you today Robert Hirschler. He has been actively involved in all aspects of color theory, color science, and color technology since 1966. He graduated at the Technical University of Budapest in chemical engineering, textile chemistry. And in 1967, he presented his first paper on computerized color matching and has been involved in colorimetry and color science ever since. His activities covered all fields of color applications, teaching colorimetry for textile engineers and principles of color for designers. He has been involved in AIC activities for over 40 years. He's an active member of both Vorkurs, which is in Brazil, and the Hungarian National Color Committee, and a member of the AIC Executive Committee. Since 2010, he's been the chair of the study group on color education, and I've been working with Robert for the last couple of years with the Color Literacy Project, so that's been very enjoyable, and I've learned a lot from him, as we will today as well. His current research interest is the teaching of the basics of color science to architects, artists, and designers, as explained in his recent article, How Much Color Science is Not Too Much. And that was published in the Journal of Color Research and Application. So please join me in welcoming Robert, and we will hear about the Bauhaus influence on color education. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Robin. Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, Mashid, in Budapest, because we have one participant from Budapest. And good morning, whoever happens to be on the other side of the American continent. So today we shall talk about the Bauhaus influence on color education. And I shall try to give a critical homage to those grand masters of the Bauhaus. But you may well ask, what does Bauhaus have to do with color? I mean, if you talk about, Bauhaus and color, we'll probably think of the primary colors, whatever they mean to everybody. It means many things to many people. But in the Bauhaus, partially because of the D-style influence, primary colors were used in many designs and many artworks. Here we see one, yellow, red, blue, and white and black. And this is a painting by Moholy-Nagy, A18, again, the same primary colors. And if you look at the Meisterhaus, the master's home, which was inhabited in 1926 by Paul Klee and Kandinsky, they were neighbors and good friends there, and they decorated the house. And again, the same primary colors greeting us there in the staircase. But if you happen to walk around in Budapest, we have a street, which is a Bauhaus street full of Bauhaus buildings. And again, you see the three primary colors. So in addition to yellow, blue, and red, what else do we have from the Bauhaus in terms of color? Well, the Bauhaus, as you probably know, was created, established in 1919, post First World War Germany, by Walter Gropius, by then already a famous architect, And he wanted to have a design and architecture school based on new principles. And he addressed architects, painters, and sculptors and told them that they must learn a new way of seeing and understanding the composite character of the building. And he emphasized that he wants a new way of teaching. He said that the art schools of the old were incapable of producing this unity. And how could they? For art may not be taught. They must return to the workshop. And they did return to the workshop. The Bauhaus, in its 14 years of existence, was famous for its workshops. And we shall speak about it quite a lot today, that they were the all-important part of Bauhaus education. Bauhaus was not famous for teaching theory, particularly not for teaching color theory, but for practice. In the concept of Gropius, art, science, and technology should be balanced in the design curriculum. He said, we can reach our aim only when arts, crafts, and industries interpenetrate each other. And this unity of art and science and technology should be very familiar to those of you who happen to be members of the Inter-Society Color Council. This is the logo of the ISCC, and the 3 points of the triangle, science, art, and industry. And I was led to understand that the circle around it is education. So this is something which should be familiar to us today. But unfortunately, through the 14 years of the Bauhaus and later new Bauhauses, this equilibrium was not always maintained. Already in the first 2 buildings in the Bauhaus, Weimar and Dessau, art and technology were more emphasized than science. But then, after the closing of the Bauhaus, Moholy-Nagy, who was a Bauhaus teacher, went to Chicago and established the School of Design, the new Bauhaus, and he put art and science as the all-important, and technology, the workshops, were kept in the background. And in the 1950s, another attempt to create a new design school, which was called the High School for Design, Hochschule für Gestaltung, in Ulm. Originally, the first rector was Max Bill, a former Bauhaus student, and he wanted again the ideal equilibrium, but he had disagreements with his colleagues, and he was ousted because they didn't want art to be equal to the other 2 areas. Well, in the original Bauhaus, and this is from a 1923 publication by Gropius, 4 years into the Bauhaus. This was the structure of Bauhaus teaching. 6 months of preliminary course, the Vorlehre, originally created by Johannes Itten. And they did have some color teaching, some work in color studies. And they had some color studies in all the workshops. There was the glass and the clay and the stone and the wood and the metal and the textile. And there was one workshop called color, but it was not really color itself. It was the mural painting workshop. But again, when, for instance, Kandinsky was head of this workshop, he was teaching color studies in the mural painting workshop. But the preliminary course was so famous that they say that today there is barely an art program at any level of education that does not in greater or lesser degree contain some remnants of the old preliminary course as created by Johannes Itten. What do we know about color in Bauhaus? We know from basically three major publications: Pohling's 1973 thesis, Color Theories of the Bauhaus Artists. And he, some years later, he organized a beautiful exhibition on Bauhaus color. Pohling was the curator. And then came Düchting's Color in the Bauhaus, Synthesis and Synesthesis, which is a very detailed description of some of the color education parts of Bauhaus. And 15 years ago, a Brazilian lady, Lilian Reed Miller Barros, published a book, Color in the Creative Process, a study on the Bauhaus and Goethe's color theory. We shall see why Goethe's color theory. Now, strangely enough, Albers, one of the most famous of the Bauhaus masters, said that at the Bauhaus, we didn't work with color as color at all. And then he was quoted saying that I do not believe that during the 10 years of my life at the Bauhaus, I heard the word education mentioned. So you may ask, how shall we speak about color education in the Bauhaus? Well, let's first see what was behind color education at the Bauhaus. And it all goes back to Goethe. And as you know, Goethe had a very strong disagreement with Newton because Newton was looking at a spectrum projected through a white light projected through a little hole and split with a prism into the spectrum. But Goethe, according to some anecdotes, didn't have enough time to study Newton's method. He was fascinated by the spectrum. But he asked for a prism, which was lent to him, but had very little time. So he didn't set up the dark room with a little hole and all the rest, which Newton did, but looked through the prism had in front of his eye. And this is what he saw. And this was very different from Newton's spectrum. But if you want to see what Goethe saw through the spectrum, take a glass of white wine. Well, maybe you can take a glass of water in a crystal glass and look at it if you place it on top of a black and white patterned tablecloth. And this is what you will see, Goethe's spectrum, which is, as I said, very different from Newton's. This is Goethe's spectrum, a window, the black frame, as seen through a prism. And you can see that at the edge, at one edge, where we see blue and light blue and cyan, and at the other edge you will see the red and the orange and the yellow. No purple colors, no green. So Goethe was looking at it, but this is looking at a white stripe over a black basis. And this is Goethe's spectrum. Again, no green. Well, if you tilt the prism, then the blue and the green will meet and produce, I'm sorry, the blue and the yellow will meet and will produce the green. And the same way, if you look at the black stripe over a white background, you will see Goethe's inverted spectrum. And again, at the edge of the darkness, and this is important, you will see red and orange and yellow. And at the other edge, you will see blue and greenish blue cyan and light blue. But if you turn the prism, purple colors will appear. And here is a summary. White stripe on a black background or a black stripe on a white background producing Newton's spectrum and the inverted spectrum of Goethe. And this is one of the fundaments of Goethe's color theory. The other important thing is, as you could see, he didn't see green in his inverted spectrum. And in the early 19th century, he was very friendly with a romantic German painter, Runge, who wrote him a letter in 1806 saying, there are only three colors, yellow, red, and blue, as is known. If we take them at full power and limited within a circle, they form three transitions, orange, violet, and green. So Goethe made a painting of a color wheel based on this principle. And 1 year later, in 1810, he published his color theory, which was one of the important sources for all Bauhaus color. Now we shall skip 19th century and all the color scientists and philosophers from Schopenhauer through Chevreuil and Helmholtz and Betzold and Hering and Ogden Rood, all these people who were very influential also already for the neo-impressionist painters. But the Bauhaus masters were more familiar with the work of two gentlemen. One of them was a German expressionist painter, Adolf Hölzel, who was also an art historian and importantly a teacher at the State Academy of Fine Arts in Stuttgart, where he also taught color theory. And Johannes Itten was his student for 4 years, 1913 to 1916, and took much of Hölzel's teaching, which was based on Goethe and some of the others. And the other important influence is Wilhelm Oswald, who was a Nobel laureate early 20th century. But at the age of 60-something, he retired from chemistry. He was more interested at that point in learning and teaching color science. He created a color space, a color order system, and this model was exhibited at the Bauhaus in 1923. And Oswald was very familiar with the Bauhaus masters, some of whom accepted some of his teaching, and some of whom, particularly Klee, rejected it vehemently. Now, Hölzel and Oswald met in 1919 at the first German color days in Stuttgart. And remember, 1919 is the year of the foundation of the Bauhaus. And Walter Gropius was present at these color days. And Hirschler and Oswald had very fierce arguments. Now, interestingly enough, they both referred back to Goethe. And Oswald said, quoting Goethe's Nature and Art poem, "Law alone can set us free again." He meant that color harmony is based on order. Color harmony is system. And this is something which the Bauhaus masters rejected very much. And Hirschler also quoted Goethe. But his conclusion was that art and scholarly science are never the same, even if we think of art and science. So these were the two extremes between which the Bauhaus masters established their own color teaching. Some of them had some color theory, the others were teaching mainly practice. Now, all these Bauhaus masters, at one point or another, taught color. Itten called himself master of the art of color. He was at the Bauhaus only in the first 3 or 4 years. The others were mainly painters, and this is interesting that Gropius invited painters to a design school. But he didn't want them to teach painting, he wanted them to teach in the workshops. But he also was convinced, and this is the unity of art and science and technology, going back to the workshops, but with an artistic sensibility. And Klee was teaching design and form and teaching color in this course. Kandinsky in the preliminary course and in the wall painting workshop. The only one who had a color seminar, only once, was Ludwig Hirschfeld-Mack, who is very little known. Albers also taught color in the preliminary course, and the others at one point or another. We shall only speak of these 5 masters. First of all, Johannes Itten, very strange character. He was invited to the Bauhaus. He was very young. He was 31 years old, but already a reasonably well-known painter, but he was invited because of his teaching experience. He had been an elementary school teacher, and he arrived with very strong ideas about what the preliminary course, which all the Bauhaus students had to take, should contain. But we don't know, today we don't know Itten because of what he did at the Bauhaus. We know Itten because in 1961, 40 years after his Bauhaus activities, he published the book, The Art of Color, which is probably one of the 2 most influential books on color in today's color education. It was translated into 13 languages and published in more than 500,000 copies. And there are other different editions of this book. And in today's elementary schools and grammar schools and art schools and design schools and textbooks, what you see is Itten's color circle, which is very controversial. I will explain why. And some people go so far as to say the heavy reliance on this system cannot be claimed, however, to have led to generations of skilled color mixers. On the contrary, it has led to muddled, confused frustration. Well, this is from Michael Wilcox, And he disagreed with Itten about primary colors. Wilcox, of course, was promoting his dual primary color system, which is again not necessarily acceptable today. But again, the interesting thing is that Itten at the Bauhaus based his teaching on his color star, which was a kind of simplification of Runge's color sphere. So Itten was well aware of the three-dimensionality of color. And he was illustrating it flattened out. But the sequence from white to the brightest colors, the most vivid colors, to black, was illustrated in his color star. But what people know today and quote today is his 1961 hue circle. It's all over in every textbook. You find Itten's hue circle. Now, what is the problem? The problem is that he kind of conflates two things. This is a perceptual color circle, but also supposed to be a color mixing tool. And when he says primary colors, yellow, blue, and red, he explains very clearly that these are the pure colors. Yellow, which is not reddish or greenish, and red, which is not yellowish or bluish, and blue, which is not reddish or greenish. Fine, but this is perceptual concept. But then he said, you take these three primary colors and mix them to get the secondary colors. And in our courses, we told our students, now do what Itten tells you to do. And these are the original Itten colors from the study material, which was a very nice publication with sealscreen sheets of Itten 12 colors. But taking the pure colors in a tube of paint and mixing them, this is what you get. Where is your beautiful violet? Bernardo did what Itten told him to do. Sonia realized that you cannot get a good violet mixing these two colors. So she got one from the tube, a violet paint, but mixed it with the red and the blue for tertiary colors, and this is what she got. Kerine said, oh, this is not good. So we shall have to take the colors and mix them. And she didn't use the three primaries to make her inverted commas Itten color circle. But this is problematic. And people get confused and frustrated. Itten himself knew that this circular area is not adequate for a complete classification. Instead of a circle, we shall need a sphere. But many people don't get this deep into Itten's Art of Color book, which is a problem. Again, in the same book, Itten uses the color circle. It's simplified. It's not necessarily the up-to-date color circle which we would use today based on whatever color order system, but better than a two-dimensional hue circle. The other very much quoted feature of Itten's color teaching are Itten's 7 contrasts. And in fact, they are not Itten's 7 contrasts. They are Hölzel's 7 contrasts, because Hölzel, published already and explained the 7 contrasts. But Itten very conveniently forgot to mention this in his book. Well, Hölzel himself goes back to Barnard and Field And Andreas Schwarz published a nice paper on the history of the color contrasts. But Andreas Schwarz also explains why this is far too simplified. We shall not go through the 7 contrasts one by one. But this is an illustration, just 2 colors, in which you can see the hue contrast and the light-dark contrast and the cold-warm contrast and the complementary contrast and simultaneous and saturation and extension. So this is again a simplification, not necessarily based on any scientific concept, but people like it because it's simple and efficient. And yet another thing which is much quoted, color harmony. Itten said, by color harmony, I mean the craft of developing themes from systematic color relationships capable of serving as a basis for composition. Systematic color relationships. This is a little bit of Oswald. Here is Itten's hue circle. And in most of today's design and art books, you find very nice drawings on complementary colors and split complementary colors and triangular color harmony and triadic and tetraic and all these color harmonies. But do they work? Well, these are some combinations considered harmonious by Itten. Well, it's very individual whether you like them or not. He had showed these combinations to his students and said, make some nice designs based on these combinations. And the students didn't like it. Itten himself writes this in his book. The students revolted. They said, these are not nice. So he said, I will let each of you paint whatever combinations you find pleasant and harmonious. And this is what the students did, each to his or her liking. And Itten concluded, he had to conclude, that each had his own private conception of color harmony. And again, most people today forget this and don't emphasize that color harmony is something very own and very private. It's very individual. And you shouldn't really use rules. Well, Paul Klee, 41 years old when he joined the Bauhaus, already well-known painter. He was very strong on practice and not very strong on color theory. Some of the color theory, and most of it is based on Goethe. He explains in his pedagogical sketchbook, which he published during his Bauhaus years. And then in 1956, a collection of his writings was published in German and also translated into English. 2 beautiful volumes, The Thinking Guy, which contains most of his writings on color, and his version of color theory, and the Paul Klee Foundation put all 4,000 pages of Klee's writing freely available on the internet, which is a beautiful thing to do, and a wealth of information, of course, on what Klee thought about color teaching. Well, it's pure Goethe. 3 primary colors, each one dominating or occupying 2/3 of the hue circle, and 1/3 is free of red or green or blue. But Klee also makes the mistake of not distinguishing between perceptual color and paints. So green for him is not a primary color. And it leads to some misunderstandings. This is Klee's canon of totality. Again, the three primary colors. And he explains how blue can be reddish or yellowish. And I'm asking you, can you imagine a yellowish blue or a bluish yellow? Well, probably you can't. We, humans with our color vision being as it is, and based not really on the three primaries, but rather on the opponent colors, Haring's theory of yellow and blue and red and green. So we cannot imagine reddish green or greenish red, yellowish blue or bluish red, yellow. But as I mentioned, Klee was not very strong in color theory. Kandinsky was the oldest of the freshly recruited Bauhaus masters. He was 56 when invited by Gropius, 1 year after the foundation of the Bauhaus. By that time, he was considered a famous painter, father of non-figurative painting, and author of a book which contained much of his color theory on the spiritual in art. This was more than 10 years before he joined the Bauhaus. And during his Bauhaus years, he produced another book with some more theory. And Kandinsky, again, is based on very much Goethe. This is from the spiritual, concerning the spiritual in art. And it's pure Goethe. Two main colors, yellow coming from the lightness and blue coming from the darkness. But Goethe said that Newton was mistaken because colors are not contained in white light. Colors are the result of the interaction of lightness and darkness. And this comes back in Kandinsky's teaching. A student of Kandinsky's, Lothar Lang, created this design which very nicely wraps up Goethe and obviously Kandinsky. So we have darkness and light. And darkness begets blue and light begets yellow. And that mixture of the two gives you green. Again, the misconception of not distinguishing between what you see and what you do when you mix paints. But then you have red, which is also kind of intermediate between blue and yellow, and similar in this respect to green and gray. Another interesting theory of Kandinsky's was his exercise with trying to find basic form and the concordance of basic form with basic colors. So triangle, square, and circle, and primary colors, yellow, red, blue. Which is which belongs to which? Well, after analyzing thousands of answers, these questionnaires, this is his answer. Yellow is triangular, red is square, and blue is circular. Now let me assure you that there is absolutely no scientific basis to this. There have been many attempts to prove or disprove what Kandinsky said. A young lady wrote a 600-page PhD thesis at the Oxford University on the correspondence of form and color according to Kandinsky. And there is no basis to it, but it was very entertaining. And his students carried on and created even intermediate forms and colors. And one student created concordance of angles and colors. And some artists, notably Karl Gerstner, took the idea and created intermediate forms between the pyramid and the sphere, with intermediate colors corresponding to each form. Well, his book, The Forms of Color, is a beautifully produced book. So just for the images, it's worth having and looking at it. Ludwig Hirschfeld-Mack was a Bauhaus student. He had been Herz's student in 1919 for a few months, but then he went over to the Bauhaus, where he was a student for 4 years. In the last year, he was a teaching assistant. And remember that Itten had to leave the Bauhaus in 1922. He had a disagreement with Kandinsky, with Gropius, I'm sorry. So he had to leave the Bauhaus, and it fell to Hirschfeld-Mack to give the color seminar in 1923. That was the only dedicated color seminar in the history of the Bauhaus. He wrote a little booklet, the introductory survey, and he created the color light play. There were colored lights projected through a screen, and there were different forms. You could change the forms, and some music was played. Hirschfeld-Mack himself played the piano, and this was the forerunner of today's multimedia. And this is Hirschfeld-Mack's explanation of Kandinsky's and obviously Goethe's color theory. Position of red between light and dark, designed by Hirschfeld-Mack. Yellow originating from light and blue originating from the darkness, and between light and dark you have the position of red. And this reflects very much in his painting. Hirschfeld-Mack left the Bauhaus, and then in 1937 he had to leave Germany. He went to England because he had to flee the Nazis because he was half Jewish. And then during the war, he was expulsed, deported from England because he was half German, and as such he was a non-desirable alien. So he ended up in Australia, and he lived a happy life there. He was a grammar school teacher. He was well loved and well respected there. Here are some of his designs, exercises. Again, this is Kandinsky, and through Kandinsky, Goethe. Advancing white and retreating black. Value exercises. And here is one screenshot from his light and color play. It is available in a DVD today, a reconstruction of the play. And here are some spinning tops from his Maxwell discs for color experiments. It's available as the Bauhaus spinning top. It's a good educational toy. Albers, the other most influential of the Bauhaus masters in color education, again, we don't know exactly what he was teaching at the Bauhaus, but we know his publication from 1963. From the Bauhaus, he went to the US. He ended up in the Black Mountain College and then Yale University. And 1963, he published this magnificent book, Interaction of Color. And he said in the book, knowledge and its application is not our aim. Instead, it is flexible imagination, discovery, invention, taste. And this was Gropius's basic idea when creating the Bauhaus. Don't teach theory, open up the minds. Try to strengthen the creativity of the students. And this is what they did. This is what Albers did. While the Interaction of Color is a magnificent publication, it was produced in silkscreen print, 80 sheets on color interactions. And he himself said in the introduction, this book therefore doesn't follow an academic conception of theory and practice. It reverses this order and places practice before theory, which after all is the conclusion of practice. And this should be our guiding light today. Place practice before theory. Let the students discover what color has to offer you, and then explain if you need the theory behind it. Well, the original publication is still available every now and then on the internet. You may find it for the bagatelle of $15,000 US. But you can have an iPad version, which is fun because it's interactive. You can find abridged and unabridged editions, cheaper and complete ones. There was a beautiful one a few years ago with the full text and all the illustrations. And his basic idea in teaching color was to use colored sheets, paper, not paint. He said paint is messy, it takes time, it cannot be reproduced, so let's use colored paper. In later years, he used colorate papers, which is still available, of course. And you can see here the exercises of simultaneous contrast here and here. And modern color workshops based on Albers, like that of Fritz Horstmann of the Joseph and Annie Albers Foundation, are always using colored paper. And there was one magnificent workshop presented by Lois Smirnoff, the great lady of color education. She wrote a book, Dimensional Color. She was Albers' student. And here she is with ISCC President David Weigel after the workshop at the Mansell Symposium. And Albers' students, Lois Smirnoff herself and others, painted or created artwork based on Albers' principles, not copying him, but using his incentive to use your creativity. Another student, Sibyl Wirtz. Lois Smirnoff and Sibyl Wirtz both used oil on masonite, which was Albers' favorite medium. He painted all his Homage to the Square series on masonite tables. Plastic artists, sculptors also were his students and used his method, not copying him, but opening up to new ways. Richard Anushkiewicz, one of the founders of op art. Albers is not considered by all art historians op artist, but he is considered as probably the most influential in the foundation of op art through Anushkiewicz and Julian Stenzek. And this is again unmistakably Albers' influence with the transparency effects. And if you take 20 modern textbooks on color education, you will find that out of 20, 13 quote or reference Itten, 15 quote or reference Albers, some Kandinsky, some Klee, and Itten's color wheel is in half of them. Funnily enough, in 4 of them, the color wheel is mistaken for the color star. In Hungary, students, 12-year-old students, learn color. Well, this is a drawing and visual culture textbook, 200 and so many pages, and only 2 pages on color. And on these 2 pages, you see just Itten's color contrast. You don't need to read the Hungarian text, but what can a 12-year-old do with this? And then 3 years later, the same thing again. And this is all they learn on color. Now, this is not in the tradition of the Bauhaus. This is a very simplified way of using Bauhaus color. But Lee said that I believe that error and misconception are not incidental to the theories of Itten and Albers, but rather that their theories very largely depend upon errors and misconceptions. Well, this is not very kind, but I think that the Bauhaus masters are not famous for their color theory. They were a group of extremely talented artists who revolutionized the way color should be taught. Not what should be taught, but how it should be taught. And this is still relevant. Practice before theory. And in the introduction, Robin mentioned the Color Literacy Project. And this is our guiding principle. Put practice before theory. Let the students experiment, discover, and then we shall explain what is necessary to be explained. Well, much of the color theory that these Bauhaus masters taught is by now outdated and questionable. But the basic problem is that most of today's so-called color educators have only superficial knowledge of the rich heritage of Bauhaus color. And I think that we should revere and be thankful for these Bauhaus masters because they opened up new ways of how to teach color. And we have the color scientists and the color theorists for the cognitive part of color education. But we can get a lot of material in the way color has to be taught from the Bauhaus masters. And this is what is their heritage, and this is what is their legacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. That was excellent. And I will open up any questions you may have. You can put them in the chat. You can raise your hand and unmute. I have one question, Robert.
Yes.
So the lightness to darkness, that goes way back before Goethe to Aristotle and imparted Klee's ancient
Yes,
Greek.
absolutely. Certainly.
Does Goethe refer to that, or does anyone go further back than Goethe?
No, a lot of it goes back well before Goethe. Goethe didn't invent most of the things, but I think that his theory of colors was the book. I don't think that the Bauhaus artists, well, they may have known Aristotle and all the others. Probably, I mean, I don't know exactly, you know, we don't know how much they read of all the artists who had something to say on color. So yes, I agree that it all goes back, but Goethe was the one who was always referred to all through the 19th and 20th century, and even today, many people quote him as the authority on color theory.
Right, thank you. Any questions in the chat? Lots of thank yous in the chat. You can turn your cameras on. It'd be nice to see everybody.
Hi, everybody.
So any questions, any topics you want to discuss, other things? Robert is a profound expert of all things color.
You know, I see a few other former color teachers here from my institution and from others. And, you know, it's interesting to me that when I was teaching color in foundation studies, you know, even though Itten's book was absolutely fundamental, and so was Albers' book, Goethe himself was I think in the literature in general to do with color was not at the center of anybody's idea of proper color knowledge, because it was not deemed, you know, that he was in opposition to Newton, and Newton was the scientist, and that was where the real information should be coming from. And so to me, it was interesting many years later to actually discover Goethe as somebody. My take on him is that he's the one who sort of brought the emotionality of color and the psychology of color into the presence, you know. But only recently, it seems to me, we're actually talking much more about him. Nobody talked about Goethe, and yet he was at the base of all of this this teaching that you're talking about, and that was prevalent in our institutions.
Well, you know, you mentioned that Newton was the scientist. Yes, and again, Newton is read sometimes very superficially, because he himself emphasized very much, you know, the famous, the rays are not colored. So Newton knew that the physical thing is not color itself. But Goethe was the one who pointed really to the psychological and other aspects of color. So I think we should mention him. Of course, he was not a color scientist, so we can argue with him. Marcia asked, I refer to two kinds of perception in color. I'm sorry, I wasn't quite clear then. I didn't say two kinds of perception. There is perception. I said that, you know, there is perceptual color, which is what we consider color. And some people, happen not to be one of them, call paints colors. So when they say color mixing, they mean paint mixing. And the problem with Itten and Klee, particularly, is that there is no distinction between the two aspects of color. The perceptual aspect, and there are some color circles, hue circles, or color order systems based on perception. And there are some attempts to make color circles or color order systems based on paint mixing or pigment mixing or printing. But the two are very different things. And this is, my criticism was to not making the distinction between these two. Renata says that she's interested in the color studies of Gertrude Grunov. I'm trying to find some publications. There are some books on Grunov's color studies, but not easy to come by. Marcia, again, who was the author of the 6-page thesis? Marcia, I can send, I don't know. I have to get the reference, but I will try to wait a minute. I will, if you'll excuse me for a second.
One of my favorite quotes from Goethe, he called Newton a charlatan and a fraud. One of my favorite historical quotes. I thought he had not the same kind of quality of lenses and prisms that Newton did. He couldn't reproduce Newton's results, but I guess also he was doing, I don't know if you ever have a prism, and you can create a black and white pattern, you can very easily reproduce Goethe's what he sees. And I had never done that before until we had a workshop with this color literacy project, and it was quite a different way of looking at color through a prism compared to Newton. So it's quite interesting to see how kind of the experiential piece was so important for Goethe.
May I share the screen for a minute?
Mm-hmm.
This is Naomi Drexler's thesis.
Okay.
If you're interested. Okay. So Jackson asked me, what do I know of Dick Nelson of Hawaii? I'm sorry. I make a note and I will try to find out about him. He was a student of Albers and now runs college study courses. He has a fascinating commentary about Albers' Homage to the Square series. Dick Nelson, I'm sorry, he escaped my attention. So,
any other questions, comments about?
Doreen said a comment, teaching about color as light is so important today. Fully agree, but there again, you know, the problem, and this is, excuse me, this is one of the aims of the color literacy project, to show, well, this goes back to Helmholtz again, to show the distinction between light mixing and paint mixing. And today with digital color, obviously light mixing is all important. And today's students are all familiar with the screen and CMY printing, but they are confused about the relationship between the two. And this was, of course, not an issue in the Bauhaus days. So,
few more comments in the chat. Any other?
yeah, Jean is asking, can I share my bibliography? I should have prepared a list of references, which I didn't. But honestly, it's a list of something like 80 or 100 books and articles on Bauhaus color. The literature is huge. I have shown the 3 major publications. The Pauling thesis, Clark Pauling thesis, is available from the university. Let me just try to conjure it up. Okay, again, I will share the screen again for a minute. So the Pauling thesis is available. You can buy it from, there are some sites where you can buy thesis. Sorry. No, no, I didn't remember. I had it through interlibrary loan. So I got the thesis in hard copy. It was not available on the internet. The Dichting book is available sometimes, but it's in German, and the Miller-Barros book is in Portuguese, so it may or may not help too much. If anybody interested in some recommended literature available in English, I can send it by email. Just send me a line and I will answer you. I will stop sharing.
All right, well, thank you again so much, Robert. And we can clap and
thank you.
Virtually or in real time. Very interesting talk, amazing perspective to give the historical context for how we teach color and how some of the misconceptions have come forward and seeped into our teaching. So it's really good to have this kind of fresh approach to something which, you know, is so embedded. So thank you again. And any more comments or questions, we will break. And just please note to check out our webpage. I put it at the very top of our chat, and our AIC 2022 conference page next June. We're organizing a conference on sensing color. So Robert will be coming to Toronto. So it'll be great to see him. Fingers crossed, all will go well. And thanks again for joining us. Stay tuned to our website and our social media for what's coming next. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you all for participating, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.